I am so pleased to end our 2024 podcast season with an author who is living the dream of many writers. My guest today is Suzanne Young, New York Times bestselling author of more than 20 books. She's also written a novel with a rock star. But the dream I alluded to is that last year, Suzanne packed her bags, sold her house, and moved to Italy, where she now spends her days writing under the Italian sun and hosting writing retreats in gorgeous villas from Tuscany to Venice. Today, we talk about tips for weathering the ups and downs of publishing so you can have a long career, whether some books are harder to write than others, her decision to move to Italy, what makes a great writing retreat, and so much more. This interview was the perfect ending to the first season of our podcast. During our holiday break, please visit creativeinspiredhappy.com to dig into the archives for more great episodes with best-selling authors, as well as creativity mini challenges, writing tips, and more. Thank you, happy holidays, and enjoy the show. Hey, Suzanne, welcome to Creative Inspired Happy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's such a joy to get to talk to you from Italy. This is so exciting because the last time I saw you, we were in Arizona for a book festival, kind of a Comic-Con, and you were literally like a couple weeks, I think, away from moving overseas.
It was actually very funny because that was the first time that I had started to tell people. So you were actually among the very first people to know in the outside world that we were moving to Italy. So, and I loved the encouragement I got that day. I think pretty much everyone was like, "Wait, can I join you?"
Oh, absolutely. No, it's totally the dream what you did. So I want to talk about Italy. I want to talk about the writing retreats that you're now running and your life as just a writer in Italy. But first, I want to go back in time because you have written over 20 books now. And I want to know how you got started. Have you always wanted to be a writer? Did you know in high school and college that this was what you want to do? Or like, what was your path to get to this career?
So I did actually always want to be a writer. I actually started writing in middle school. I would write murder mysteries starring all of my friends, and I would kill them off one by one in this horror style whodunit, which of course now you would want to do. Um, so I started there and kind of became like school famous doing that. So I started with. I started writing short stories and then went to college for creative writing in Plattsburgh, New York, and then decided to become an English teacher because I'd never considered writing books. I wanted to write short stories. I just wanted to tell stories. I never thought of it as a career path. And so I became a teacher, which actually I consider my passion is being a teacher. So I ended up becoming a teacher. And then one day I was writing a short story and it just kept getting longer and longer and longer and became a novel. And I reached out to a friend and said, "Hey, do you want to read this? It's kind of like a book." And she did. And she's like, "This is amazing," which of course, you know, your family and friends are going to say that. And so I Googled how to publish a book. Now, of course, this is back in the early 2000s. And, you know, back then you actually had to print out your novel and send it to an agent. And so I learned how to write query letters, how to send them out. I sent over 100 queries for that first book. All were rejected. But towards the end, as I started to get better, some of those rejections were like, "What else do you have?" And I just kept at it. I wrote 5 books. I had 2 agents. And on that 5th book, that was my first book deal.
So actually, this is a really familiar story that I've heard over and over, which is that writers they have to get better at their craft. And if you keep at it, you know, a lot of us actually have novels that we've written that are stored in drawers or on our computer hard drives that never got published. And I'm kind of wondering, like, how did you get through those early years of writing, but getting rejections?
So So I'm actually the worst example. So I'm like the one I think other agents warn their clients about. So I just would write a lot. I loved to write. I would just write all the time. I love to tell stories. And so I was writing books. I was sending them out. I had gotten my first agent, and through the process of querying and practicing, I was actually getting to know agents and also getting to know editors, like meeting them at conferences, things like that, just in a very just casual way. And so I had reached out directly to an editor, and he was like, "Yeah, I want to read that book. That sounds great." And so I told the agent, and she's like, "You can't do that. You absolutely cannot do that. I don't want to represent you anymore." And that was the end of that. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." So then I was like, "Well, what do I need an agent for?" Sorry, no offense, agents, but I was like, "What do I need an agent for?" And again, early 2000s. And so I decided to just write to the president of Razorbill Books of Penguin. And so I wrote to him and I said, "Hey, I wrote this book. If you want to read it, let me know." And he wrote back and he's like, I don't know what to say. Like, he was like, "I'm so like, I appreciate your, having the guts to just reach out to me directly. I can't say that's ever happened before, but yeah, send it to me." And he did. And they ended up offering, and I signed a 4-book deal. So that was kind of my random way
Wow.
about it. Yeah.
You are the cautionary tale where people are like, don't stalk people in the bathrooms at conferences, don't go above, people's heads, please like follow the chain of command. Was
And
that the program?
no, actually, I had 2 series before the program. The first one I don't really talk about, although it was really cute, but it just kind of came out at the wrong time. Like, it was right after the end of what used to be called Chicklet. So it was like right after that was out, and it was kind of moving towards a dystopian. But I wrote like a very cute, mystery, story, and and then I wrote my next series was fantasy, kind of supernatural fantasy, right at the height of that. But again, I just missed that trend, because I never write to the trends, I just write, and so I missed that one. And then I just sat there and I wrote the program, and actually I had a book deal. I had the first look with another house, and they rejected the program, and I was devastated because I was like, I thought this book was it, the program was it. So I'd actually reached out to another editor who had previously offered on my other book, so I knew she liked my writing, and I said, "Hey, I wrote this book. I don't know if you want to read it." And so she did, and then she called me and said, "Okay, are you difficult to work with?" And I was like, "No, not at all." And she's like, "Because I don't understand why they wouldn't want to buy this book. It's amazing." And so she ended up buying the program. And even though I had published 4 books before the program, that's what broke me out and basically built my career.
So I have a question from our community about the program, but first I kind of want to touch on some of the things that you mentioned. You'd published actually several books, and I feel like publishing is an industry where there's a lot of ups and downs. There's, like any creative career. And it's easy for people to now look at someone like you who's like New York Times bestselling author, you're very well known, and they just think that everything you write is touched with gold, everything's an automatic hit. And maybe that's true for you. At least for me, though, that's not true. Like, even after, I've had a couple of books that really did well, in between there are books that are complete flops that like, have not sold very many copies, that sometimes unfortunately didn't actually even get publisher support. And so, and the other thing I've noticed is that for a lot of the authors that, kind of debuted around the time I did, they ended up writing 1 or 2 books and then deciding to leave the industry. And, everyone has their different reasons for it. But I think that part of it is because it's not always easy. And that is kind of a reality that I think it's important for people to go into knowing. And yet, this is also obviously an incredible career that you and I have decided to do for a very long time. So I'm wondering, like, what do you attribute your longevity to, like, and then maybe B, do you have any tips for writers about weathering those ups and downs in this industry and that unpredictability?
That's a fantastic question. And I have to say, it is there is something special about meeting another author who has been in the business a long time, because you know that they've been through it too, because no one stays on top, or no one has a bestseller. Well, not no one, but few people have a bestseller like their whole career, right? We all have those ups and downs. But if you've weathered it, like, I know you're strong, and I know that you have this certain drive. So I think for me, what has gotten me through, because I've had those ups and downs, my first 2 book series were canceled, and they were with 3 different publishers, or 2 different publishers, and then the program was a third publisher. So I think the reason I was able to keep publishing after 2 failed series is that I never, again, like I said, I never chased trends, but also I kind of never stuck to the same kind of book. I write in all genres. Like I'm kind of all over the place. I write whatever inspires me and I tell that story. And then I think, sometimes that ends up hitting and you have that little bit of luck because of course we never know what the trend's going to be before it hits. Right. So a little bit of luck of some books hitting at the right moment. The luck of, you know, some books taking off with readers and they passing it around. And it's funny, like something like the program, that was one of my lowest advances. It didn't have a huge marketing push behind it. It was one of those books that kids were passing to each other in the hallway. It was one of those books that had this word of mouth, and that's how it built over time. So I think for me it was that perseverance of never giving up either. Like I write across genre, and also when I would hear no, it didn't, not that it didn't crush me, because I've definitely had the lowest of lows. But it was never going to make me stop writing. I'm always going to write. Even when I literally told my friend, I want to say like a week and a half ago, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to write anymore. I have nothing else to write about. Blah, blah, blah. And she goes, oh, okay, I'll talk to you in a couple hours. And don't you know, in a couple hours, I said, wait, I do have this one idea. And she's like, of course you do. So I'm just one of those people that has a lot of ideas. I'll always be writing. And so I think that obviously helps keep me in the business. But I've also seen the same thing. Like you said, like some people have published same time as me, like, they've gone on to do other things and been successful doing other things. But, I think you have to have this certain level of, I'm going to be writing anyway. I mean, those ideas aren't going to stop coming. And it's sometimes a punishing business, but I mean, I love it. I love it. For tips that I would give other writers, I mean, I'll be fair. My daughter said something about wanting to be a writer. And I said, why would you do that to yourself? And I was only half kidding when I said that, because it is a little bit tough. I think you have to find a way to be able to protect yourself. I think you can write the book of your heart, like you can have that, but you have to understand that once you get that out there, it's out of you. So that means if someone says something bad about that book, or that book doesn't do well, that is not a reflection of you. That is not like you shouldn't take that so personally, like they're rejecting you. So I think if you're going to keep going, especially when you're facing adversity, you have to make sure you've found a way to protect yourself, whether that's never reading your reviews, which by the way, I never read my reviews anymore. But of course I started, in the beginning, reading Goodreads, but I can't even tell you the last time I've even read a review of my books. And it's not because I don't care what my readers think, but I also don't feel like those reviews are for me. And if I read them too much, it actually gets inside my head a little bit and it makes me self-edit. And I never want to do that. I never want to, think too much about the book as I'm writing it, because I'm just one of those that flows. So I don't know if that answered your questions or if I rambled, but that's my advice.
No, that's super helpful. I'm actually curious because you've written across genre and I have done that as well. And I think people often get the advice from agents or editors, publicists, or just internet, for better or for worse, that you should really be writing in one genre in order to have
Mhm.
audience loyalty. And I've actually myself said that before because I had an agent tell me, look, if you start your career, you write 4 books that are in the same genre. So for me, I started out in YA fantasy. So she was like, you write 4. And then after that, you get to branch out and do more of what you want, because otherwise you'll lose your audience, but you have to create that base. Do you actually think that's true?
Um, it's interesting that they had a specific number. I don't know if I had known that, maybe I would have tried it. I, gosh, it's so tough because I mean, I'm sure there is some truth to that, but at the same time, anyone who's written a series and published it knows, the first book does the best, and then the rest kind of taper off a little bit. So if you have spent, it depends how fast a writer you are, but if you spent 4 or 5 years just on this one series or this one genre and none of those break out, well, the thing is, you're going to have to do something else. Like you're going to have to do something else when your next book comes out. Like you're going to have to change it up somehow, because you do unfortunately have to deal with your sales records when you go in for that next book deal. They look at things like sales and how something did. And one good opportunity is to say, well, yeah, that's how this did, but now I'm writing in this style. Now, that's not why I do it, but you do get to have that little bit of, I don't know, a little bit of like differentiation on that. I've never been someone who can, like, I need to be really passionate about the story that I'm writing. Um, I don't know. That'd be interesting because my ideas are all over the place. Like I just pitched a couple of new books and I was like, this one's a romance, this one's a horror, and this one's a murder mystery. And like going through, and I was like, oh, and I have an idea for a fantasy. And so I think I wouldn't have gotten anywhere if that was completely true. But I do see the logic behind it. So it's interesting.
Maybe it's just kind of like every career is individual. Okay, so I have a question for you from one of our community members, Trista, and this is about the program. But it's also general. And so her question is that, the program dealt with some pretty heavy subjects. So were there any books in that series or in any of the books in your career that were actually harder to write than others?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting is hard to write is two different things for me. So I have hard to write where it's like, it's actually just difficult, like writer's block, that just the time it's taking, or I'm bored with it or something like that. So I do have those books that I wasn't as passionate about like at the time, but then it took me forever to find my soul in that book. And then it was okay. As far as books that are difficult to write, the program was not one of them. That book flowed out of me. That book has a lot of my own personal experiences and traumas and feelings. And I mean, I want to say I wrote that first draft, obviously. I think I wrote that whole book in a month. I mean, I couldn't stop writing it. I was addicted to it. I really just poured myself into it. Now, when I got later in the series, those became a little bit more difficult. It's interesting because I think so much of myself was in the program. Not that it's my story, but just so much of myself was in that book that when it came to the later books and I was writing about other people and I had to make these terrible things happen to other people, I had this sense of guilt, even though these aren't obviously real people. I had this sense of guilt putting them through these events. So it actually became later in the series when I started to get a little more distance from it. The other one is the series Girls with Short Sticks. That one was very difficult for me to write. I actually wrote it. The first draft of that book is entirely different than what was published. And it was, and to be fair, I wish that was the version that was published. Not that I don't like the one that was, but that first version was kind of like the program in that it was just myself. I poured myself into it. It was just all raw, all raw, like feelings and emotions, and vulnerability. Now, through the editorial process, there was, this is a little too much. Like you're gonna have to tone this down. Like it was at a very trying time that I wrote that book, and we toned it down and made it a lot more palatable. And so for me, I always and that was harder for me than writing those tough subjects, was having to tone it down when I was feeling so emotional. So it's an interesting problem to have, I think, rather than it being that I didn't want to go to that emotional space, it was having to pull back from that emotional space, which was more difficult for me.
How do you reconcile, or like how do you make it okay for you to like move on and be like, you know what, this was like that raw, vulnerable story I wanted to tell, but like commercially, in order to get the story out there, we have to make these changes. I mean, I feel like that's such a hard decision. It's a hard compromise for any artist to make.
Yeah, I've actually, that's the only time I've ever experienced that much pushback, or I don't know if it's pushback. I guess it's interesting because after that book came out, and actually we had a film deal with that book, but the film deal was for my original draft because I had sent that original draft before I rewrote it. So if they made that movie or that TV show, it would have been based on that first version of it. Now I understand why it had to be changed up. I mean, it was a young adult novel, and spoiler alert, I had them go room by room and kill all of the people that had been holding them captive. I mean, it was very like rage, it was anger, and it was cathartic. It's one of those where it's like they didn't want to become like these people that were hurting them, but that's what they had to do to escape. And then they had to reconcile with their own guilt after that. And even the book's cover was, I just want, they were like, we can't have any blood on the cover because, the gatekeepers, the booksellers, they won't like that. Which of course that same year I saw a bunch of books with blood on the cover. So yeah, I mean, it was hard because I mean, I don't take any editorial advice and be like, okay, you know best. I mean, that's not what editorial advice is. It's usually like, can you tone this down? And they never specifically tell you how. Like you have to figure it out, like what works for the book to tone down and still make it a book you're proud of. Like I'm still proud of the book. I very much think the finished version is great for the audience. I mean, it won like Florida Teen Book of the Year. If it had published the other version, it probably should have been adult. So I accept that, some of the changes they made were necessary. Um, but yeah, again, I had to accept that my original vision wasn't going to work for the market I write in. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, I think it kind of goes into part of what we were saying before. Like this is it is part of the journey of publishing, right? And like, it's lovely to be able to say like, hey, here's my pure vision of this thing I've created. But then, the reality of getting it to market and is sometimes it requires some compromise, as many things do, I think, in
Yeah.
life. I want to pivot to actually one more question about another one of your books, and then definitely we want to talk about Italy. But so you co-wrote a book with Tom DeLonge from Blink 182, who is, I think, the co-founder, lead singer, lead guitarist. So we have a question from our community from Juan G. And he says, writing a book with Tom DeLonge from the band Blink 182 must have been quite an adventure. How did that collaboration come about and what was the experience like?
Gosh, honestly, I wish I could go back because it was such a great time. It was kind of a strange way it came about. One day, my agent actually called me and said, hey, so do you listen to the band Blink 182? And I said, no, no offense, Tom. I said, no. And he says, okay, well, I'm just the guy from Blink 182. He wants to talk to you. He liked the program and he wants to write a book and he wants to co-write it with someone. Will you talk to him? And I'm like, I mean, I guess, but I don't know if we have the same aesthetic. So I was at school because I'm a teacher, and I luckily was on break, or on my prep period, and so I'm in the teachers' lounge, talking on the phone with Tom DeLonge from Blink 182, and he's telling me about the story. And if you've ever seen Tom talk, he's like super animated. He's hyped all the time, like he's just like stoked. And so he's telling me about the story, this and that, and he ends it with, "This story, it's about love, it's about adventure, it's about death." And I'm like, uh-huh. So and it was like motorcycles and dreaming. And I'm like, I'll be honest, I'm not sure that I'm the writer for you. I mean, it sounds great, and so he said, I'll tell you what, we actually have a animated short film, if you don't mind watching it, that goes along with the story. Yeah, okay, send it to me. So, I'm laughing about it. And like, I go home, I watched the animated short. It was amazing. Like it was amazing. Poet Anderson. It was amazing. And I emailed my agent and I said, yes, I want to do it. I want to write that story. Like that looked so cool. And like I suddenly got everything he said. And so after that, I flew out to, luckily I was in Arizona at the time. So I flew to San Diego. I met with him and his team. At the time he had a store for To the Stars. They had an in-person store. And we hung out at the store. Went out to lunch, and we ended up just kind of plotting it out. And basically, as I was writing it, I would send him, chapters. And what I I always joke, and he agreed with this, is that I'd be like, okay, what do you think? And he's like, I love it. This is so rad. And he's like, but I think it needs more explosions. And I'd be like, all right. And I would just amp it up, and I kept trying to get it to the level of what Tom would say if he was going to talk about this. Like I wanted him to be proud of it. But what was also really interesting and cool while I was writing it is he was making, because he's also in the band Angels and Airwaves, they made an entire Dreamwalker CD or, music record album. And so then he got to share with me the songs that go along with the book. Like the book had a soundtrack. So I just kept getting, like, he would send me drawings, like all these points of inspiration. When it was all said and done, we had a big release party at a store, and then we went on tour. And I always laugh when I actually tell the story a lot. Is we were on tour, we were at a Barnes and Noble, I think at the Grove in LA, and we're sitting there, and it's packed, right? Like the people would sob when they would come up. They'd have them sign their arm, and then they'd show up at our next stop and have tattooed his signature on their arm. Like his fans are diehard, wonderful fans. Anyways, at one point we're there and security comes running over as we're taking a picture and like grabs this guy, and the guy's laughing because he has a pair of scissors and he was going to cut Tom's hair. And Tom's like, oh, don't you hate when that happens? I'm like, yeah, that doesn't happen to me. I don't typically have people try to take locks of my hair. And then we left and people were chasing after the car, like chasing after the limo or town car. So yeah, it was like, and he thought that was a normal like experience. And I'm like, this is a rock star thing. This is not a, an author thing. Unless of course for you, if you normally have people chasing after your car as you drive away after a book signing, maybe it's just me.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
So it was a great experience. We actually still keep in touch. So,
Wow.
one of those things like, hey, if you ever want another Poe Anderson book, let me know. It was a blast to write. It was a really good time.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I do think that's probably a pretty singular experience. Being an author, being quote unquote famous as an author is nothing like that, right? Like being famous as an author means you go to a book festival and a few people know who you are and they're excited. And then afterwards you go to your hotel and like no one knows who you are. Like the receptionist does not care who you are. There's no one chasing after you.
Nope. So I'm glad I had that though. It was fun.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's talk about Italy. So you sold everything. You said you sold literally everything and you and your family moved to Italy. How did you make that decision? Because that's a huge, huge leap.
Yeah. So actually it started, probably 2017. A friend of mine, actually, an illustrator, he had told me that he was working on his Italian citizenship by descent. Our families are from Italy. And he started telling me about the process and I was like, oh, like I should look into doing that. And then my husband and I came and visited Florence. And it was actually during one of the lockdowns, but it was like we had left and got to Florence and then the lockdown happened. So no one could fly in or out. So we basically got 2 weeks in Florence with no tourists. Who wouldn't fall in love? Like, I mean, who wouldn't fall in love with Italy to be able to experience the city for yourself? I mean, yeah. So we were like, wow, like maybe we do want to live in Italy. So basically we spent the next few years, I was doing genealogy, like collecting documents, talking to all my family members, doing all the stuff. And we came and visited, 6 or 7 more times. And I talked with my kids who, now are 21 and 23, going to be 24. And my son was going to college. My daughter was just about to start college. And I said, you guys, what do you think about moving to Italy? Like, should we just move to Italy? And I don't know. It's so funny because I think there's a lot of times in life where things just happen. Like, it's like this course is set and you just are like, yeah, this is what's going to happen. And I had a great job. I had a great corporate job. I was doing the best I'd ever done. My husband had a great job. My son was going to school. My daughter's going to start school. So like, there was no reason that like at that time that we had to move, but it was like the time is now. Like this is the time. So it was almost a year and a half ago now. Before anything wild was even going on in the world, we were just like, um, I I want this adventure. And I was like, if I can give my kids this experience of, being dual passport holders, number one, because they have their citizenship as well as I do. And getting the chance to maybe go to college here, go to university here, which my daughter does. They're learning Italian. My daughter speaks Italian already. Like she learned it. She just picked it up super quickly. And just seeing how it's changed them. So anyway, so we decided, okay, let's do it. We're going to move. Now, then it took another like 2 years. And as we started to organize all of these things, it's like, oh, actually, it's super hard to move to another country. There's a lot, there's a lot you can't do. There's a lot you can do. we ended up buying a house out here. Actually, we bought an apartment in a 15th century villa. And we have 3 dogs. So we actually had to transport 3 dogs over here as well. My husband had to stay behind. So it was actually just me, the kids, and the dogs that came over. And in that time, we did an estate sale and literally sold everything. We came here with 4 suitcases. We didn't send our furniture. We didn't send anything. I had one suitcase that was just for like keepsakes for my family and our clothes. And yeah, four suitcases each because we came out separate times, and that's it. And I took one copy of each book of mine, sold the rest, sold our house, sold our cars, and then we moved to Italy. And then we were like, okay, well now what? So, but luckily we made a lot of friends right away. My kids are doing super well. My husband's doing Italian classes now. So yeah, we're all together. We're here, and what's great is we spend most of our time just exploring. There's so much to see. I mean, there's so many UNESCO World Heritage sites. We don't even really leave Italy. I mean, I've left a few times to go to other European countries, but mostly there's still so much to see here that I can't imagine I'll ever see it all or I'll ever get bored of exploring.
That's incredible. I mean, you just really went all in. And I feel like, this is actually very in line with your personality. There's a boldness to you where you're just like, you know what? I'm going to just send this thing to the president of Razorbill. I'm just going to move to Italy and let's see what happens. So I'm kind of curious is, this how you got started with doing the writing retreats in Italy, because now you have writing in Italy and you've already
Mhm.
done 3 retreats. You rent these gorgeous villas in different places around Italy. And was that inspired by just like, like you said, exploring and touring around? And how did you decide, yeah, this is something I think would be really fun and also I think really wonderful for other writers?
I think, we've seen a lot of things come and go in the writing business, and we've seen a lot of, we've been to a lot of conferences, we've been to a lot of events. And I think to me, having the writers retreats are a place where you actually truly can connect in a different way, in a more personable way than you do at, like, say, a conference. So before we had moved here, I think we already had our apartment, which is not big enough to hold retreats in, unfortunately. But I was just like, I would love to have, at first I was like, I'd love to have my friends come out and let's like have a little writing retreat. And I kept thinking about that idea and I was like, well, maybe I could even bring out like a faculty member, like an agent or an editor. But really, I would love to get like a movie producer. And I remember I was at Comic Con, Phoenix Comic Con or Phoenix Fan Fusion. And I was like workshopping this with other authors. And I was like, okay, so if I were to bring people out, what will we do? What should we do? And it's like, oh, we should go see this town. I'm super proud of where I live. Like, I'm really proud. Like, I'm really excited to take people to the small towns. Like obviously Florence is wonderful. I love Venice. I live 40 minutes from Venice. I go to those places, but I also take people to these like little small towns because to me, like, that's what's inspiring. Like seeing these places that have existed through so much, like so many wonderful and terrible things, like, but here are these buildings and here are these traditions that have lasted, and it really is so inspiring. It's so beautiful. So basically once I got out here, I actually didn't know there would be so many villas. Like there really are a lot of random villas throughout Italy. However, many of them are in disrepair. So you have to find the ones that are converted, but also converted for American standards. And we like things a little bit fancier. We expect to have like a certain way of doing things. And so it was a little bit hard to narrow that down. And then once I found the right villas, I started putting together programming. Like I knew I wanted to go on 2 adventures. I knew I wanted to have a couple of writing days and like have faculty come. So, I've been really lucky to have just amazing people come to the retreats. I mean, the very first one was just like right off the bat, I didn't know what I was doing, I'll be honest. And it all just kind of, it worked out. It came together. And, I owe a lot of that to the people who came out. And that includes like Danielle Clayton, who actually came to 2 of them and has been incredible faculty. Bridget Kemmerer, Cindy Pon. Sarah Reese Brennan, like they were all there at that first retreat, and we're like, keep doing it, girl. Like this is it. Like keep going. And so then I had the second retreat, and with that one, I brought out director Sarah Walker, who did a Warrior Nun, Discovery of Witches, and she got to come and talk to us about making film and writing with the idea of towards stream, or not streaming, but like film and TV. And also Kristen Pettit, who is an incredible editor. And then this last one we did in Tuscany, we did a big one, like as in like it was just this amazing, beautiful villa. And I had Molly O'Neill, agent, come out, and she's probably one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. Like she was talking and we were sobbing. We were like crying because like she made us like work on our inner selves, and just really had that inspiration for us. But I also had like Eddie Gamara, who used to work for Paramount, and Adib Karem. I mean, it was just in what really what's really special about the retreats though. It's those late nights. It's sitting around and chatting. Like the first retreat was all of us who had actually been in the business for a while, right? It was all of us like kind of talking about this highs and lows and, the things you don't say online about those highs and lows, and like just really getting that chance. And then after that, they were, Diana Rodriguez Wallach, like they're like, she has people on her podcast. She has blurbed books. Like everyone's become such great friends, and they didn't know each other before this event. And we are all still on a group chat, like a writing in Italy group chat. With the second and third retreat, it got opened up more to new writers. And what I love about that is there's such a fantastic mix of new and veteran writers who have been in the business. So it's like you get this mix of someone who's either just starting to get a little bit jaded, with someone that's coming in with some new optimism, and they both are benefiting from that, like of those different places in their career. And I try to also diversify the faculty that I have too. I want to talk about the different aspects of the writing career, and also the different places where you are in your writing career. So yeah, that's how it came about. I love doing them. Like I've made so many great friends, great connections. In fact, like I just reached out to someone who is at my last retreat because I want to hear the update on her book. And I just met her at the retreat. I didn't know her beforehand. She just decided to come, and she was, she workshopped an idea. And I just thought of her today, and I was like, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, how are you know what I mean? How's the book going?" And that's like a genuine connection that you make with someone that is really hard to get unless you see them face to face. Also, we're like all like kidnapped in Italy together in a villa. So it's like an extra bonding experience because we're usually a little bit remote. So it's not like they can get away.
Oh my gosh. Well, it sounds so extraordinary. It sounds like an absolute dream. And I love this idea that, and I think you're right that at retreats, you really, really bond with people because you're there, you're sharing such a special time together. And it's this intensive moment to just focus on yourself and your craft that a lot of times we don't get because life is just busy, and like, we have work ethics, we work at our desks every day, but there's something really special about going away to a retreat. And then you become friends with people you don't know. But also, I know that you also have a invite a friend kind of program too. So like if people want to travel with another writer friend, you have something on your website where it's like, they get $100 off, like both people get $100 off for like coming to the program, to the retreat together. So I love that.
I really want to build a community. And I think being able to go there with a friend, like actually the last retreat was very interesting because I had 3 sets of mothers and daughters. So I had, young, like I had a couple girls who had just graduated from university who were breaking into the business, and wanted to get that. And then their moms who had been writing for a long time, and their moms that were actually published authors. So that was so great because my kids are at these retreats. Like my adult children are there, helping out, like getting waters, so they're part of this too. And so it was really just such a cool experience. And of course we have like sets of friends that come together as well. But there's also a lot of people that come on their own and make those friends. But I just, traveling internationally is kind of an intimidating thing sometimes. But I love that you just have this after it's done. Not only do you have the community of the retreat, the people you were with on the retreat, you actually start connecting with the people who had also been on different retreats. I know Adib had told me before he came out that he went to an event and they had mentioned writing in Italy. And he's like, wait, I'm going to writing in Italy. They're like, you're going to write in Italy? I just got back from it. And they were talking about it. And now they're friends because they had both had that kind of experience. And that to me is just really cool. And I love to share that. So.
I love that so much. I do have a question for you. Like, so the ultimate goal for me and many writers is to get to writing in Italy. If
Yeah.
before that they wanted to do kind of a DIY retreat at home with just their friends to like try it out, what are your tips for what makes a great, like maybe like a smaller version, cozier retreat?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Actually, it's funny because I was thinking even out here of doing just like, does anyone want to come do just like a weekend writing retreat somewhere? I think, number one, I think what makes writing retreats so successful is the escape from your daily life, right? It's escape from having to, no offense, I'm a mom, but having to cook everyone dinner from, if my house is dirty, I'm not going to be writing. I'm going to be cleaning my house because it's a reason for me to not focus on my writing. So you have to be somewhere where you do not have the responsibility of taking care of other people. So that's my number one tip. And I know it sounds selfish, but that's what holds us back sometimes. It's the fact that we don't want to be selfish, but really it's like, if you want to have this retreat, you're going to have to take me time. It's going to have to actually be your time. And that's been one of the biggest things that people said is like, it was so nice to feel like I put myself first for this. So be somewhere where you don't have to take care of anyone else. Also, the food is really important. I think, having that option to have food and kind of something that I really liked and really enjoyed is like maybe even have an activity like a cooking class one of those days. So say you're doing a little 3-day retreat, one of those days, do some kind of group activity or something that you wouldn't normally do. And it makes it kind of exciting. So you got to have that one time that you're blowing off steam. So whether it's doing like a cooking class and you're terrible at it, it's funny, and or I'm trying to think what else. Just something where you get to like bond and do something kind of fun, or like even like doing like a pottery. Making like terrible vases or something. And I think, those late night chats are when you're the most vulnerable. So, sitting around, having that time to just decompress, talk about yourself, talk about maybe about what you're writing, but mostly talking about your career and what you're seeing for it. Those are talking about that, about your career, what you're experiencing, what you have experienced, what you want to experience. That to me is more beneficial than sitting and just talking about the book you're writing, because that's just one piece of it. I think everyone needs to kind of come to terms and with what they want out of their career. So having those, and when I say late night, it doesn't mean it has to be like late at night, but just those kind of quieter moments where you're sitting around and just talking. And I think those vulnerable moments are the ones you're going to learn the most, truly. And then during the day, having writing, but you can't just write the whole time. Or you know what? It's just like, go do that yourself. If you're just going to write the whole time, do what I used to do. And I would go to a hotel for 2 days by myself and I would just write like a just nonstop, just write. Order room service, come home and be like jittery. Um, that was just to write. But if you're having a retreat, it is about that experience. It is about finding a way to open up, to be vulnerable, to help others. And just that's what's going to make you bond, but also good food.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay, so if anyone happens to be listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and you can't see video, you should definitely come check out. We're going to have some photos from your latest retreat on creativeinspiredhappy.com. So make sure you check that out. But tell us about your next retreat, because I know you're taking a little time off, like so you can actually write books. But your next retreat, I think you said, is September of next year, 2025. So if anyone wants to start planning and putting that on their holiday wish list or their New Year's resolutions, what are you allowed to tell us?
Well, so the last retreat was in Tuscany. And like I said, I'm still in a group chat with all of the past guests. And I said, where should the next one be? And everyone agreed, Venice. Venice. So we are going to Venezia in September. I will post the dates on my Instagram page, which is writing underscore in underscore Italy. And you'll have basically, two options. You can share a room with a friend, or I could even find you a friend, or you can just buy your own spot. Of course, with all the retreats, it includes that transportation from the airport to the residence. Where we're staying, I haven't quite decided yet, so I'm still putting the finishing touches on this. But when I tell you, there's nothing like writing in Venice. I mean, it's just one of those places that is so wonderfully haunted in the most artistic way. You really you can feel it when you're there. And I know everyone's going to be incredibly inspired. There's so much to see that there's no way you'll see it all in 6 days. But we'll try. So yeah. And then, of course, I always, if you join our newsletter on the website, writinginitaly.com, I do send out news on the retreats, but I also offer like an early deal. So an early bird kind of special, because the sooner I get it booked and know who's coming, the better options we'll have to do things. So I always offer like early bird discounts. So keep an eye out for that.
Oh yeah, that sounds like the best way to make sure that you're on top of things. And that sounds amazing. I love Venice so much. Gosh, I'm just so happy for you, for everything that you've already accomplished and for this new adventure that you're on. You're so inspiring. And so, gosh, thank you so much for being on the show, Suzanne.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love what you're doing. I love your newsletter, by the way. I'm always like, wait, can I do some of this? I just love like all the different advice you give, but all the different opportunities that you provide. And that's what's really, and that's where the inspire really comes out, is just these incredible opportunities that you offer to people. So thank you for giving so much back to the community, honestly.
Oh, thank you. That seems like such a great note to end for the holidays. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.